Right in the middle of modern Rome, surrounded by traffic, apartments, and noise, there's a monument that still looks like something tore straight through it. And once you really look at it, the question hits you fast. Why does one side feel complete while the other looks brutally cut away? It doesn't look ruined in a normal way. It looks like half a giant shell survived and the rest was somehow ripped loose. That's what makes it feel strange. Rome kept growing all around it, but this building still carries a damage mark nobody can ignore. So what happened here exactly? Was it war, collapse, looting, bad design, or something so gradual people barely noticed it happening? Because this isn't just a cracked wall, it's a scar that records centuries of disaster, survival, theft, rebuilding, and pure Roman endurance. And that's the crazy part. This place was once whole, polished, crowded, and designed to look almost impossible in the ancient world. So the real mystery isn't whether the Colosseum was powerful, it's how something this massive ended up looking unfinished in the center of Rome. To answer that, we have to follow the building through emperors, fires, earthquakes, medieval Rome, and the people who literally carried pieces away. Because the missing side of the Colosseum is not one mystery, it's the final result of many different disasters stacked together. 2,000 years ago, the Colosseum didn't look broken at all. It looked brand new, enormous, shining bright in the Roman sun like a monument built to last forever. The outer walls were smooth travertine stone, almost glowing in daylight, and inside, many of the arches stood statues that made the entire building feel even larger. From above, the structure looked almost impossible, 4 stories tall, perfectly oval, massive walls rising above the city like Rome was showing the world its power. And inside, this place could hold around 50,000 people, all watching the arena below where spectacles unfolded that were louder and more dramatic than anything before. Gladiators, wild animals, and massive staged events turned the Colosseum into something closer to a giant entertainment machine than just another Roman building. Beneath the arena floor was an underground maze called the Hypogeum, where elevators, trapdoors, and cages allowed animals and fighters to appear suddenly. Even the sun couldn't stop the games. Giant fabric awnings called the velarium stretched above the arena, shading spectators from the brutal Roman heat. When emperors like Titus sat here watching the games, the Colosseum wasn't just entertainment, it was a massive display of Roman power. Day after day, year after year, this enormous structure stood untouched, perfectly symmetrical, and impossible to imagine ever becoming the broken monument we see today. But buildings that survive centuries don't fall apart in one moment. The Colosseum's missing side would come from something much slower. For hundreds of years, the Colosseum stayed strong, but by the 3rd century, Rome itself was changing, and the arena slowly stopped receiving the care it once had. The games continued for a long time, but the energy of the empire was fading, and the massive building slowly began showing signs of neglect. Rome also faced fires, economic problems, and political chaos. Maintaining a structure this massive was incredibly expensive, and repairs slowly became less frequent. Stone buildings can survive centuries, but only when people constantly repair them. Without maintenance, small cracks begin to appear and slowly spread. Then nature stepped in. Rome sits in a region where earthquakes happen, and those powerful shocks began striking the Colosseum again and again. Each earthquake weakened the structure a little more. Huge stone blocks shifted, arches cracked, and parts of the outer wall slowly began losing their strength. At first, the damage looked small, just fallen stones and broken sections, but something important had already begun happening on the southern side. The southern part of the Colosseum stood on slightly weaker ground, and earthquakes began affecting that side more severely than the rest. Then, in the year 1349, a massive earthquake struck Rome, and this time a huge section of the outer wall finally collapsed.
Suddenly, the Colosseum wasn't just damaged. A massive portion of its outer wall was gone, leaving the exposed interior skeleton we recognize today. After the earthquake collapse, something unexpected happened. Instead of rebuilding the Colosseum, people in medieval Rome started seeing the ruins as a giant supply of stone. Huge travertine blocks that once formed the outer wall were now sitting loose on the ground, ready to be dragged away and reused somewhere else. And when the fallen stones ran out, people began cutting blocks directly from the Colosseum itself, slowly turning the ancient monument into a quarry. Between many of the stones were iron clamps holding the structure together. Those were valuable too, so workers ripped them out from metal. Those empty holes you still see today were left behind after the iron was removed, and every clamp taken out made the structure weaker. Even marble from the Colosseum wasn't safe. Some of it was burned in kilns to produce lime, a key ingredient used in medieval construction. So pieces of the Colosseum slowly spread across Rome, becoming roads, walls, houses, and foundations for completely new buildings. Some of Rome's famous palaces and churches were literally built from stones taken directly from the Colosseum itself. By this point, the Colosseum wasn't just damaged by earthquakes anymore. Humans had begun finishing what nature had started. The missing side of the Colosseum wasn't created by one disaster. It was the result of earthquakes first and centuries of stone removal afterwards.
By the early Middle Ages, the Colosseum wasn't just a ruin anymore. It had slowly turned into something completely different, a place where people actually lived. Inside the massive arena walls, small homes, workshops, and even streets appeared, turning the ancient amphitheater into something like a tiny medieval neighborhood. Imagine walking through what used to be the gladiator arena and instead finding shops, animals, and families living their daily lives. Some arches became workshops where craftsmen worked with metal, wood, and stone, while the ancient Roman structures stood towering above them. Eventually, powerful Roman families saw the structure as something even more valuable, a ready-made fortress right in the center of the city. The massive stone walls made it perfect for defense, and the Colosseum became a stronghold controlled by noble families fighting for power. For centuries, this ancient arena became part of medieval conflicts as rival families struggled to control one of Rome's most strategic structures. By this time, the Colosseum looked nothing like the polished Roman monument it once was. Instead of cheering crowds and gladiators, the arena had become a strange mixture of ruins, homes, and defensive walls. But eventually, even that chapter ended, and the Colosseum began returning to something closer to the silent monument we recognize today. When people notice the Colosseum today, the first thing that stands out is the missing outer wall that exposes the inner structure. It almost looks like the building was sliced open, but the real explanation comes from something hidden beneath the structure itself. The southern side of the Colosseum was built on slightly softer ground compared to the rest of the structure. When earthquakes struck Rome over the centuries, that weaker foundation meant the southern wall absorbed much more stress. The most devastating moment came during a powerful earthquake in 1349, when a huge section of the outer southern wall finally collapsed. Once the wall fell outward, enormous piles of stone surrounded the monument, leaving the inner arches exposed for the first time. Those fallen stones quickly became valuable building material, and people across Rome began carrying pieces of the Colosseum away. What we see today is actually the internal support system of the Colosseum, the structural skeleton that used to hide behind the outer walls. The rest of the Colosseum survived because those walls stayed standing, but the collapsed southern section was never rebuilt. So the missing side isn't a mystery anymore. It's the result of earthquakes, weaker ground, and centuries of people slowly carrying its stones away. By the time Europe entered the Renaissance, the Colosseum was already heavily damaged, and many people believed the ancient structure would eventually disappear completely. For centuries, people had treated the Colosseum like a quarry, taking stone after stone to build new palaces, churches, and streets across Rome. Some of Rome's most famous Renaissance buildings were literally constructed from stones taken directly out of the Colosseum's ancient walls. Every stone removed left another gap in the structure, and over time, those missing pieces made the monument even more fragile. By this point, the Colosseum was no longer just damaged.
Parts of the structure were dangerously unstable. Sections of the structure continued collapsing slowly, especially after earthquakes and years of people removing key structural stones. Rome kept growing, but the Colosseum looked more and more like a dying monument from another world. At this point, many people believed it was only a matter of time before the ancient amphitheater disappeared completely. But something unexpected happened that changed the monument's future forever. Instead of letting the Colosseum vanish, the church began seeing the ancient arena as a sacred place connected to Christian history.
By the 18th century, the Colosseum had become more than just a ruined monument. Many people believed it was connected to early Christian martyrs. Because of that belief, church leaders began viewing the Colosseum not as a quarry, but as a sacred place deserving protection. In 1749, Pope Benedict XIV officially declared the Colosseum a sacred site, putting an end to centuries of stone removal. To reinforce its new meaning, crosses and religious markers were placed inside the arena. Pilgrims began visiting the Colosseum as a place of remembrance, transforming the ancient arena into a spiritual landmark. Instead of dismantling the monument, workers finally began stabilizing the structure to prevent further collapse. Huge brick supports were added to stabilize sections of the building that had become dangerously weak. For the first time in centuries, the Colosseum was no longer being destroyed. Instead of a quarry or fortress, the Colosseum was slowly becoming something else, a monument admired by visitors from around the world. And that transformation would eventually turn the broken arena into one of the most recognized landmarks on Earth. Today, the Colosseum stands in the middle of modern Rome, surrounded by traffic, tourists, and city life that never stops moving. Every year, millions of people come here to walk through the same arches that once welcomed Roman crowds almost 2,000 years ago. Visitors can now see the underground corridors where gladiators once waited before entering the arena. Archaeologists and engineers constantly study the monument to understand how it was built and how to keep it standing. Restoration teams carefully repair and clean sections of the ancient structure to slow down the damage caused by time and pollution. At night, the Colosseum lights up, turning the ancient arena into one of the most dramatic landmarks in the world. Guides tell visitors the stories of gladiators, emperors, and disasters that shaped the monument over centuries. For many travelers, seeing the Colosseum in person feels like stepping directly into the past. And that missing wall, the side that looks broken, is often the first thing visitors notice. But that missing side is more than damage. It's the visible history of everything the Colosseum has survived. When people first see the Colosseum, they usually notice the missing wall before anything else. It almost feels like someone sliced the building open to reveal what's inside. But that exposed side actually reveals something extraordinary, the hidden engineering that allowed this enormous structure to survive. Without that collapse, we might never have seen the incredible system of arches and supports that made the Colosseum so strong. This single monument has lived through emperors, earthquakes, wars, medieval cities, and the rise of the modern world. Each broken stone and missing wall tells part of that long story. And somehow, despite everything that happened to it, the Colosseum is still standing. 2,000 years later, it remains one of the most recognizable structures on Earth. So, the missing side of the Colosseum isn't just damage, it's the visible scar of 2,000 years of history and the reason the Colosseum still tells its story today. If you enjoy real history that feels unreal, subscribe and like the video so you don't miss the next story. Thank you.